Wynorrific, a word balanced between beauty and terror. Welcome back, dear listeners, to another Wynorrific Wednesday. I am your devoted hostess, Lady Noelle, your guide through the shadows, where whispers become wails and reality warps at the edges of the unknown. Tonight, we bring you two stories steeped in dread. Our first tale takes us into the heart of a storm, a hurricane that doesn't just bring devastation, but something much, much worse. And our second tale? It lingers at the edge of sleep, where a silent dancer glides unseen, until it's too late. So settle in, my friends. Lock your doors, dim the lights, and prepare for a journey into the dark places where nightmares are born. When the skies darken and the wind howls, we expect destruction. We expect power outages, lost homes, shattered glass. But what if the storm carries something else? Something waiting in the floodwaters, unseen, until it's too late. Our first story tonight is a harrowing survival tale. A mother and her deaf daughter caught in the unrelenting jaws of a hurricane. But the real danger isn't just the storm outside. It's what lurks beneath the rising waters. Written by N.M. Brown and performed by Olivia Steele, this is Hurricane Warning, Category Death. My teeth clenched in a tight grimace as pain shot down my left arm. I took a deep breath, steeling myself before looking into my daughter Cassidy's face. The look of terror and helplessness etched into her features wasn't one I'd seen before. And as much as I wanted to buckle at the knees myself, I couldn't. The second she saw how terrified I truly was, it was all over for us. The only hope we had of making it was by staying calm, rational, and mainly alive. I allowed a lie to consume my face in the form of a gentle smile as I released her hand from my forearm. The small crescent indentions in my skin from her grip didn't surprise me, but the droplets of blood sure did. I wiped them away on a nearby shirt absent-mindedly, stroking Cassidy's cheek as I did so. Her eyes searched my face wildly for signs of what to do. This wasn't our first rodeo. Living in Florida puts you at risk for hurricanes for pretty much the last third of the year. But god damn it, this one wasn't supposed to hit us. I'm not an idiot. I know how to pay attention to weather alerts, the news, and all that other shit. Every year they show a clusterfuck of projections, graphs, noodle lines, and everything else to show the projected path of any tropical storm or hurricane. And I'm telling you, we weren't in any of them. For God's sake, we shouldn't have even lost power. But from the sounds I was hearing outside, we were all losing so much more. I'd been so lost in thought that I didn't notice Cassidy had latched back on until the stinging in my arm returned. My poor sweet girl, born without 1 ounce of hearing. As selfish as it sounds to say, there weren't many times I envied her condition. But now was certainly one of them. She was terrified enough without the swale of audible destruction taking place in our neighborhood. The pressure in the air was palpable, even to me. I couldn't imagine the type of thing she was picking up on. She removed a trembling hand from my arm, taking the first 2 fingers on each hand and sticking out her thumbs before placing them together in a stacked, swirling motion. Sign language for hurricane. I placed a steady hand on her shoulder and nodded my head. I looked her deep in the eyes, moving my lips carefully to aid her understanding. "It's going to be okay, Cassidy." Her father had been against learning to read lips, said life would be hard enough for her without having to learn all the extra bullshit. But I disagreed, not because I wanted to make things hard for her, but because I knew she held the resolve and intellect to achieve anything that she wanted to. She'd signaled to me before that learning to read lips made her feel like she was in a secret club of sorts. It tickled her that out of a playground full of hearing children, she'd be able to get the scoop on the drama that belonged to the kids around the neighborhood. So many people focus on who is listening that not many of them stop to think of who's watching. Now, don't get all excited. My kid's not one to stir the pot. She just likes to peek at what's inside from time to time. And if it makes her happy, then more power to it. My little girl ain't hurting anybody. However she feels comfortable being a part of the world is just fine with me. Her tender fingers returned to my arm, tugging gently this time. For the briefest of moments, I was able to catch a stillness in the chaos, focusing intently. It seemed as if each tug from her hand was in sync with my own heartbeat. My eyes drifted down to hers, and what she asked me nearly brought tears to my eyes. Are we going to die? It wasn't something that I hadn't asked myself when I first realized how bad things would be. We don't have basements here to hide in, and from what I saw before the power went out, the quick-set shelters are almost literal mobs full of panicked and desperate people. Not to mention all of the reports in other cities of robberies during the last storm, both inside and outside of the shelters. That was one of the many reasons why Cassidy and I found ourselves in my walk-in closet, with my queen-sized mattress barricading the doorframe. As much as I hate to admit it, I wasn't sure if we should be upstairs or downstairs. Both locations were at risk for causing harm. Were we going to die? Who the fuck was I to say? None of this was supposed to be happening. Period. As many thoughts such as those flew around my mind almost all at once, I refused to further traumatize an already petrified child. Leaning back to allow enough space between us to move freely, I told her as long as we make safe choices and stick together, we'd be able to make it through much worse things than this. A smile began to bloom across her cheeks as I bent to her level and assured her, "No one's doing any dying today, Butch." Butch was a nickname my father came up with for Cassidy. And if I have to explain it to you, then you wouldn't get it anyway. Before too long, she told me that she needed to go to the bathroom, which happened to be not far from our front door. Was it the safest thing to do? Maybe not. But I wasn't quite sure we had reached pissing on the closet floor level of danger either. Either way, I figured she could go to the bathroom. I could grab some more closet snacks and peek out the front to see just exactly what we were all dealing with weather and damage-wise. "Don't pee your pants," I joked, reaching down under her arms to give her light tickles which sent her into body hiccups of giggles. Once I was sure I had her full attention, I made my best He-Man stance and kicked the mattress out from in front of the door. However, I wouldn't be in a silly mood for long. My room was swallowed in absolute darkness. It almost seemed to suck up the brightness from our flashlights. Relief began to set in once the living area was in full view, and I ushered Cassidy to the bathroom door. The setting sun, though in turmoil, still provided enough light to see by through the unboarded windows. Unfortunately, the relief I found in it was shallow and fleeting. The floor's surface, especially by the front door, looked slick and shiny. My heart sank at the almost inevitable reality that water was indeed getting into the house. I reeled at the unfairness of it all. A hurricane has never come this late in the year and almost teleported off path like this. My soul was saddened for our little town. The wind outside sounded like a malevolent entity, hungry, dark, and all-consuming. That always seems the most terrifying, doesn't it? When things seem to take on a dark mind of their own, I mean. A cacophony of splintering wood and broken glass blasted from an upstairs room. I instantly sprinted back over to the bathroom, signaling Cassidy to follow me upstairs. The impeding water would soon reach the bedroom we were hiding out in, and the last thing I wanted to do was keep an 8-year-old girl calm in ankle or even waist-deep water. Branches twisted unnaturally outside as Mother Nature had her way with them, and the floodwater was steadily rising. So I traded one set of risks for another and made my way upstairs to the upper bedrooms. As much as the roar of noise outside scared me, the sounds it left behind in its wake were much worse. My ears would have welcomed the Category 3 winds to come back and drown out the sound of desolate suffering, and maybe they would. But at that moment, all I heard were sobs, screaming, and the sound of more glass, with the most prominent seemingly coming from right outside Cassidy's bedroom window. The realization then dawned on me that my daughter and I weren't going through this alone. Other people and families were also trapped in the calamitous state of their homes. Involuntary grunts of pained bones escaped my lips as I lowered myself to the floor to look under Cassidy's bed. "Stay right here," I told her, only after surveying the area to make sure she'd be safe in my quick absence. I took tentative steps to the windowsill, taking a moment to be thankful for the wherewithal I had to have Cassidy and I put our shoes on beforehand to protect our feet just in case. Peering out, I could see that the water level had risen to mid-living room level of the surrounding houses. My gaze stopped when it met a pair of weathered, wide eyes. It was my adjacent neighbor, Mr. Adler. I wasn't too familiar or friendly with him, honestly. He had initially called Cassidy a rude child when she wouldn't answer a question he asked or respond to something he had said. I had to explain to him more than once that she was born non-hearing. But some people, if that's not their life, they don't give a fuck, right? Well, poor Mr. Adler was certainly singing a different tune this evening. He looked so frail, perched against the edge of his window. He was hollering something awful. "Mr. Adler?" I shouted. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, fervently pointing to the water below. His voice was clear despite the distance. An emergency operator had told him that rescue workers couldn't report to the area until the conditions were calmed and the roads were clearer. I feared as much, which is why I hadn't bothered wasting my phone battery trying to fight through phone lines for help that was unavailable, albeit temporarily. The old man brought his foot up to meet the window ledge, and from the direction he was looking, it was clear he wanted to reach the roof. In God's name, he's gonna kill himself, I thought, terrified at the prospect of seeing him fall. I called out to him. You know I had to. And you also probably know that it was to no avail. God knows what was in that water, but I can sure as shit say I'd rather him take his chances swimming than trying to climb on the roof. These weren't apartment buildings. There was no staircase or door providing roof access. You had to get up there the hard way. When I say my heart leapt in my chest and froze there, I mean it. I literally felt a frigid lump lodge between my lungs as I watched him use his weight on that raised foot to stand, turning, trying to grab onto something to hoist himself up with. The writing was almost literally on the waterlogged walls. One way or another, he was ending up in that water. What in the hell was he thinking? I didn't know this man's medical history. There was no way to know if he was in his right mind or missing medication. There could be a number of things that led him to try to escape that way. It was dangerous enough being as high up as we were. If the water didn't get us, a falling tree sure as hell could. "Stop! You're going to get hurt!" I pleaded. He stopped what he was doing to turn his head and stare at me before gesturing below emphatically. Stuttered words flew through his lips faster than my ears could understand them. He kept pointing down at the water. "I don't understand! Can you not swim?" Mr. Adler shook his head emphatically, letting me know that swimming wasn't the issue. He shrieked as he noticed the water level actively rising. Unfortunately, I noticed it too. The rain still whipped around outside despite the semi-calmed winds. My entire being was torn between running back to Cassidy and staying put to literally talk my elderly neighbor off of a ledge. Frightened tears prickled the corners of my eyes, though I knew crying would solve absolutely nothing. How was I possibly supposed to help this man when I couldn't even help myself at the moment? I was far from a concern of his, that much was for sure. He had gone right back to attempting to climb out of his window in order to reach the roof. My heart beat frantically as I watched him with bated breath. It was like watching two cars, knowing it was unavoidable that they would crash. But there's just nothing that could be done. All I could do was stand there, motionless, waiting for this man's doom. A faint vibration hummed against the soles of my shoes, kissing my toes in quiet alarm. It was something I taught Cassidy when she was practically a toddler. The world is a busy place, sometimes even within the walls of your own home. If she needed my attention and for some reason couldn't get it visually, stomp on the floor. If someone was around and thought it was odd or rude, well, they could just go fuck themselves, couldn't they? All that mattered was that I knew, and my daughter knew. It was important for Cassidy to feel heard, especially since she wasn't able to do so. I knelt down beside the bed just as she raised her fist to pound on the floor. She stopped, mid-motion, and I honestly marveled at what a beautiful child she was. I was so blessed to have her. She wanted to know if it was safe to come out and look out the window. I told her she could come out, but had to stay away from all the glass in the house, especially windows. However, now that she brought it up, I couldn't help but think about Mr. Adler and his current situation. Waves of relief swelled through me when I saw he was no longer at his window. Hopefully, he'd gained the common sense to go back inside and seek help in another, safer way. And as I said before, I had next to no knowledge about this person. But if I had to guess, I'd have to assume that he lived alone. I did my best to scan the inside of the house for any activity, but regretfully saw none. There was one thing I did notice, though, that I was sure wasn't there before. A faint red streak kissed the bottom corner of one of the shutters that had managed to stay on despite the onslaught of wind and rain. I didn't want to do it at the time, and now I wish I hadn't. Maybe then Cassidy and I would be able to spend what could very well be our last moments, at least in this house, with a sense of togetherness and peace. But I did it. I looked down. Mr. Adler was laying face down in the watery grave that was once our shared bits of yard below. One arm was twisted and floated behind him at an unnatural angle, while the other remained tucked close to his torso. But his head, oh my God, his head. The top quarter of his skull was gone completely, and the other side wasn't in much better shape. The brittle neck bone that connected the two had obviously been broken in the fall as well. I'd watched 100 horror films, but had never even come close to seeing anything like this in real life. My stomach retched and I turned away to make sure Cassidy was out of his line of sight. There was no help for our poor neighbor. All we had to do was stay out of danger for a couple more days. As long as nothing big hit the house in the next 48 hours, we should be okay. I was just about to suggest that we move into another room, when out of the corner of my eye, I caught something stirring outside. Now, I'd heard of sharks and gators and all types of other animals showing up in communities due to confusion by the flooding rains. My first fear was that something like that had decided to grab Mr. Adler, adding insult to already fatal injury. But no. A cracking sound resonated up to my window from below as my neighbor's bones jerked and quaked beneath his skin. The way he rose to his feet was akin to a puppet on a string. What was left of his head lolled to the side, resting on his shoulder and bobbing slightly with each unnatural movement. He took a few shaky steps through the water with searching, empty eyes. The moment he saw me, he took off like a bullet. His broken form sped effortlessly through the water, slamming into the side of my building over and over and over again. Cassidy and I have been up here for what seems like hours now, and the sun has long set. She isn't able to hear Mr. Adler slumping against the side building, but I had no idea if she could feel it. I've managed to get her to fall asleep for the time being. From the muffling of noise over time, it sounds like he's banging himself apart out there, or at least losing steam. He is far from my main concern, though. There are holes all throughout the roof. We can't seem to find dry shelter no matter what room we migrate to. I'm terrified of whatever is in that water to cause Mr. Adler to distort and deform the way that he did. But from what I saw out of my window, he's not the only one. I am desperate for help at this point. The rescue crews will hopefully be able to make their way out by boat in the afternoon. But until then, I'm terrified. Mr. Adler's still banging away and the water is pouring in. If you read this, there's something in the water. I don't know if you have to swallow it or if it can affect you by mere touch or even through a cut. But there's something in the water, and it wants to kill us. That was Hurricane Warning, Category Death. A chilling reminder that some storms don't just pass. Some leave behind something unnatural, something hungry. Tell me, dear listeners, if you found yourself trapped in rising floodwaters, would you fear drowning? Or what might rise from below? Have you ever woken in the dead of night, paralyzed, watching something move just beyond the edges of your vision? What if that something was watching you too? Our next story is a dance with fate itself. A faceless figure steps from the darkness, its movements graceful yet grotesque, its presence a silent prophecy of death. No matter how many times it appears, the outcome remains the same. Someone will not live to see the dawn. Brought to us by Velox Publishing, written by Tor Anders Olfen, and performed by Nicole Goodnight. This is The Pale, Faceless Dancer.
I've seen her 5 times, and every time someone I know ended up dead within hours. I say her, but I'm really not sure if that's even remotely accurate. She has the graceful, elegant limber movements of a woman, and even though her physique is completely androgynous in nature, I still feel more comfortable imagining her as a woman for some reason. The first time I saw her, I had to be around 5 or 6. The ritual is always the same. I wake up in the pitch blackness, unable to move a muscle. Then a slowly growing pale pulsating cyst will appear in the periphery of my vision, eventually birthing the dancer in violent, horrible contractions. She will climb out, pale, tall, and spindly, completely hairless. But what really disturbs me is the face, or lack thereof. I can sort of see the cavities under the thin skin, the flickering movements of her eyes under there, or the way she opens and closes her veiled mouth. She will stand there in the periphery for a while, gently swaying side to side before she starts dancing. I guess the closest I can come to describe it would be a disturbing version of ballroom dancing. She moves gracefully, mimicking holding her partner, gently floating back and forth, her head constantly turned in my direction. I can see her mouth moving under that pale, translucent skin, like she's trying to tell me something. But she never makes a sound. When the unheard music stops, she will too. She would have moved across the room now, usually standing by an exit, either a window or a door. She will continue to move her unseen mouth for a little while, before she slowly fades and becomes one with the darkness. At this point, I can choose to wake up. I've only done it twice. The very first time it happened, and the last time it happened. It's not that something horrible happened the first time I woke up. I think it was more the feeling that she hadn't really left. That she was still there somehow unseen, hidden just beyond the veil. My heart wouldn't stop pounding. So I climbed back into bed and hid under the covers, shaking and crying. The next morning, we got word that our neighbor had passed away. She was a sweet old lady, Mrs. Barrow. Died of a heart attack. They say she went peacefully, but I'm not so sure about that anymore. I didn't make the connection back then. How could I? I was barely old enough to understand the finality of death, let alone tie it to a pale, faceless nightmare. But then it happened again, 5 years later. The same ritual, the same faceless creature, the same dance. I didn't wake up this time, however. I just slipped back into the comforting, warm darkness of sleep. And I woke up to my mom crying. My grandmother had died. They didn't tell me how until a few years later. She'd drowned in her bathtub, fallen asleep or had an episode or something, just collapsed and drowned. 2 years later, my uncle died after I was visited by the faceless dancer. Car accident. Must have fallen asleep at the wheel. His body was crushed, mangled, unrecognizable. They had to pick up pieces of him for days. Horrible thing. Now I was old enough, though. Old enough to spot the pattern. To question what the faceless dancer really represented. Was it death? A portent of doom, an omen of unrest? Or something else? Something vile and sinister. A horrible, taunting defiler. Or was it just a messenger? Merely a bringer of bad news? I didn't know. And I didn't really care to know. When I was 17, I saw her for the 4th time. This time the dance seemed more intense, more violent, like the unheard music moved in sudden bursts of extreme rhythms. Her face remained still, however, even when her body warped and twisted and turned. The face was motionless, fixated on me. I woke up crying, trembling, dreading the news I knew was coming. My mom was hysterical, torn up, in shambles. My dad had died on his way home from a business trip. His plane had some technical problems and had to make an emergency landing. When the cabin crew went around to check if everyone was all right, they found my father dead. He'd somehow got entangled in the seatbelt, suffocating as the plane made its unplanned landing. It was ruled a freak accident. Look, I know what you're thinking. Well, I know what half of what you are thinking. Why don't I tell someone? Why don't I warn them? Do something. Short answer is I've tried. I've tried to tell someone. But they always look at me like I'm either delusional or some sick freak. I've lost friends because of it. My mom refused to listen to me and more or less disowned me when I told her about it. No one will take me seriously. And I don't blame them. For the longest while, I didn't even believe it. Just some crazy hallucination caused by sleep paralysis or something. The deaths? Coincidences. Nothing more. I convinced myself of this, and it worked too. For 15 years, never saw her, never felt her. It was all in my head, some shitty psychotic episode or mental breakdown or something. I was free. Until a week ago. It started like all the other times. A pulsating pale cyst, leathery and disgusting, throbbing in the periphery. Then she clawed her way out. following the repulsive rhythms of the contractions. She climbed out slowly, rose to her spindly feet, stood there swaying side to side, started the graceful dance, her face always fixated on me. Back and forth, her skin-covered mouth moving, forming unheard sentences. She elegantly made her way across the room and slowly faded away. But I wouldn't have it, not this time. No one was going to die because of me ever again. My husband was sound asleep next to me. I'd never told him about the pale dancer, and I never will. My kids were in the next room, Noah and Trinity. I couldn't risk them. I couldn't risk her hurting any of them. So I forced myself awake. Trembling and sweating, I got up and slowly crept to the last place I'd seen her, the door. I don't quite know how to explain it, but there was this residual presence like an echo of her being. It lingered wherever she'd physically been present, but I felt it stronger where I had last seen her. I opened the door and slowly made my way to the kids' room. I didn't feel her there, but she was close. I turned around and immediately let out a hoarse whimper and stumbled back in shock. She was there, at the end of the hallway, still dancing, still moving, still mouthing soundlessly towards me. Then she suddenly disappeared around the corner. I swallowed deeply and thought for a second about waking up John, my husband, but I still couldn't risk it. This was something I had to face alone. So I followed her. When I turned the corner, she was halfway down the stairs. Her face was still following me whenever she turned, always fixated on me. My heart was pounding. I was sweating and trembling like a leaf. My mind filled with all the potential gruesome conclusions to this horrendous game of cat and mouse. But I had to know what it meant. So I kept following her. Down the stairs, into the living room, out into the hallway, and then she stopped. She'd reached the door and just stood there, completely motionless. Her mouth wasn't moving anymore either. It was like she was frozen in place. Then she faded again. Without thinking, I fumbled open the lock and threw open the door. She was still there, now standing in the middle of the street. She was dancing again, but in jarring, erratic fashion, her limbs completely out of sync, her head bending in extreme, unnatural angles. "Stop it!" I suddenly yelled hysterically. She stopped, just like that. I moved closer to her, stepped out the door over the threshold, and as soon as my body had left the house, she was standing right beside me. She was standing right behind me. I could feel her cold breath on my neck, her spindly hands on my shoulders. I turned around in shock, and I screamed. Her mouth was open, a bloody, gaping wound, the fleshly skin flapping disgustingly as her hoarse, croaking voice penetrated my ears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for leaving." She stepped into the house and the door slammed shut. I freaked out, completely lost it. The door wouldn't budge and I couldn't even imagine what was going on in there. Who she was taking from me this time. I banged and clawed and kicked the door before I finally came to my senses, found a rock and threw it through one of the windows. The glass shattered instantly, the shards spreading everywhere. I cut myself badly as I clumsily stepped through it. I raced up the stairs. I've never felt fear like that, never. The mere thought of anyone hurting my kids sent tremors of terror, horror, rage, and sadness, all mixed into a hurricane of unending distress. I more or less kicked the kids' door open only to find both of them sound asleep. Then I heard the screams coming from my bedroom. Our bedroom. Bestial screams. Screams of utter torment. "No!" I yelled as I stumbled down the hallway and into our bedroom. She was perched atop my husband, her face still turned to me. But this time she had a horrible, fleshy, bloody smile on that otherwise featureless visage. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. Then she faded, gone in an instant, vanished. John's eyes were bulging out, his tongue swollen and blue, sticking out between his clenched teeth. His face was purple but soon turned pale and lifeless. They say he went quickly. But I know better. I know the endless torment he must have endured. Brain aneurysm, they told me. Could happen to anyone. Bad luck. But there's no such thing as bad luck around me. Only the pale, faceless dancer. And the promise of death.
That was The Pale Faceless Dancer, a tale of inevitability, of omens we cannot outrun. The question remains, was the dancer a harbinger of death, or its executioner? And if she appeared at the foot of your bed tonight, would you wake up, or would you pray you never do? Special guest talent Nicole Goodnight is a New York-based voice actor. She specializes in horror narration and is very thankful that her 5 cats are now used to her screaming during recording sessions. Her specialty is bringing true feelings to any part that she takes on and enjoys heavy emotional roles and crying in scripts. She's also a VTuber on Twitch.tv, where she speedruns and plays horror games. You can hear more of her gorgeously immersive narrations with our friends over at the No Sleep podcast. And so, dear listeners, another Wynorrific Wednesday fades into the night. Tonight, we wandered the haunted woods and the halls of sleep, meeting creatures that hunger for more than flesh. But the real question is, will you still hear their whispers when the episode ends? As always, if you enjoyed tonight's stories, let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share with your fellow night dwellers. And if you wish to take Wynorrific Wednesdays beyond YouTube, remember, we're also available in podcast form, so you can carry these nightmares with you wherever you go. Until next time, may your nights be filled with Wynorrific wonders, your dreams vivid, and your fears well-kept secrets. Sweet dreams, my friends.